Hi there, my name's Dilly, and I've got a long one for you today. We're going to take a look at the inspirations behind all of the names and the characters of the Shadow in the Wheel of Time, including the etymology and the history of each. Some of this I covered a little bit in my previous video, The Genesis of the Wheel of Time, but there's definitely a lot more to delve into here. Spoiler alert, I am going to be talking about the entire series, as well as a little bit of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Alright, and without further ado, here we go. Robert Jordan's original notes revealed that the primary antagonist of the series was originally a completely different character. However, the seeds of what would become the Forsaken and the Dark One were already present. It took a lot of work to fully flesh out these concepts and bring them to the forefront of the narrative. In the original notes, there was no opening of the board that released the Dark One, which was opened by the Ancient Aes Sedai as we see in the final version. Instead, it was ancient users of the power who were experimenting with alternate realities and came into contact with a civilization from another world. They exchanged knowledge, but much of what they received in return was obscure and difficult to use. The power users were told of a land of peace and plenty, but when they arrived, they found a corrupted and blighted wasteland. From Origins of the Wheel of Time, page 73, worse. The knowledge they had given enabled the lords of that other world to break into the world of our story. The greatest and most vicious of these lords was Sakan. The armies that followed him came to be known as the Forsaken. Men, half-men, and not men twisted and without souls. A war of power ensued, blasting the earth. Here, we are introduced to Sakan, who is meant to be the main antagonist of this otherworld civilization. However, what's unique is that he's not the sole ruler or king of this civilization, but rather just one of its many lords in power. The term Forsaken is also introduced here, but initially it doesn't refer to a specific group of creatures or individuals from this otherworld reality. Instead, it's a name for all of Sakan's armies. The description of half-men and not men may have been a placeholder for his monstrous forces, but it's fascinating to note that this early on, the term half-men is already being used. As fans of the series know, half-men eventually became one of the names for the Myrddraal. In this same section, Jordan has left some notes to himself, like, should these have a source more evil than merely lords? And get a good name for Sakan's lieutenants. Even from the start, Robert Jordan was considering the idea of a more powerful force driving the otherworldly lords, but he didn't fully commit to this direction for the series until much later. He also had a hard time coming up with a cool name for Sakan's top brass, eventually giving them the name Forsaken, while his armies became known as Shadowspawn. The Forsaken eventually replaced the Lords as the series' main antagonists, and the plot of invading other worlds was scrapped entirely in favor of a greater focus on the source more evil. In place of Sakan, Robert Jordan introduced Shaitan, a primordial force of evil. Shaitan is an alternate spelling of Satan, which originally just meant an adversary in early Hebrew texts. Later, it became the name of the Christian adversary of God. Robert Jordan mixed this concept with beliefs about reincarnation and the cyclical nature of time to create the cosmic relationship between the Creator and the Dark One. Notably, this idea of the Creator aligns with the concept of deism, or the idea of a creator god who does not interact with the universe after creation. Another inspiration for the Dark One was the Japanese deity Amatsu Mikoboshi, a formless primordial entity of chaos. Unlike Satan, a fallen angel, this dark god is not typically depicted with a body, but rather as a black, oily liquid that permeates all of reality. This is more in line with how the Dark One is described in the books. The original concept of the alternate reality war is interesting to consider, as it would have provided a vastly different context for the story of the Wheel of Time. However, as the story developed, Jordan realized that the idea of a corrupted world would work better as the result of the bore being opened and the Dark One being released. This allowed for a more immediate and pressing threat to the world, as well as a clear and understandable source of evil. Now let's delve into the characters of the Shadow, specifically the Forsaken. The name Forsaken is a direct reference to the biblical story of the fall of man, where Adam and Eve are cast out of the Garden of Eden for disobeying God. In the Wheel of Time, The Forsaken are also individuals who lived in Paradisen, or Paradise, and they betrayed their creator by joining the Dark One, and were subsequently imprisoned outside of reality. The names of the Forsaken are also significant, as they are derived from a variety of sources, including mythology, history, and language. It's worth noting that the members of the Forsaken don't use that word, they call themselves the Chosen. Unlike much of the fantasy works being published at the time, they are not simply one-dimensional villains, but are complex characters with their own motivations and backgrounds. Their individual stories and experiences help to shape the overall narrative of the Wheel of Time, and provide a depth to the narrative that would be lacking if they were mere caricatures of evil. As Robert Jordan continued to write the first few published books of the series, The Eye of the World and The Great Hunt, he continued to develop the lore and world building. Even though much of the lore of the series had already been established, there were still many elements that were being fleshed out. As mentioned previously, the concept of the portal worlds and stones as the origin of the antagonist was dropped early on and was only briefly featured in The Great Hunt before being rarely mentioned again. Surprisingly, the names of the 13 Forsaken were not fully fleshed out at this point in the series. While readers were told of the number of them in the first 2 novels, only 4 had been named: Baalzamon, or Ishamael, Lanfear, or Selene, Agenor, who had already died, and Balthamel, also dead. Jordan had a list of potential names for the rest of the Forsaken after Book 2, including Samael and Ravin, but many of these names were completely different or significantly altered. This shows how even the core elements of the series were constantly evolving as Jordan continued to develop the story. Those names are Moloch, Saventar, Bealdred, Malador, Maleficent, Sharain, and De'eth. Very creative on that last one, Robert. I can see why some of these were changed. Even these abandoned names for the Forsaken have some interesting historical roots. De'eth, from death, obviously. Not really much to say on this one, other than the origin of the Proto-Germanic Dalthus. Malador, adapted from malodorous or malodor, Latin. It means bad smell, just a stinky guy or gal. It could potentially refer to their personality rather than a physical smell, i.e. someone with repugnant and disgusting thoughts or behavior. The end of the name could refer to the word dour, meaning stern, gloomy, or unhumorous. Sharain. No idea on this one. My best guess is chagrin, or mental disquiet and pain from failure. Either that or an alternative of Sakan, but that's also a big stretch. Maleficent, from maleficent or maleficus, Latin, to cause harm or have ill intent. Perhaps the ending of the name refers to sin. Just imagine Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. Moloch. Named after the god of the Canaanite people mentioned in the Bible, he is associated with child sacrifice. This is also the inspiration behind Moaloch, the Unmade, in the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Saventar, from Savitar, a Vedic sun god, the sun before sunrise, and god of motion. This seems an odd choice for a Forsaken, as this god is considered benevolent. This was even 5 years before DC Comics introduced Savitar as the villain to The Flash. Bealdred, from Belial, a name for Satan used only once in the New Testament, mixed with the word dread. In Gnostic works, Belial is another fallen angel, a lieutenant of Satan. This became the Forsaken named Belial, and in Hebrew, the word Belial means worthless one. These 7 names became the ones we know today from the series: Demon Dread, Asmodean, Belial, Graendal, Moghedian, Semirog, and Masana. Add that to our lineup of Baalzamon, Lanfear, Agenor, Balthamel, Samael, and Ravin, and we have our finalized Team Dark One. It's interesting to see the evolution of the names of the Forsaken and how they ended up being changed or refined. It's not uncommon for authors to go through multiple iterations before settling on the final version of a character or concept. At times it can be difficult to tell the Forsaken apart, so for my own purposes, I'm going to assign each of them an easy to understand title representing their role in society before their fall to the shadow. First up, let's dive into Asmodean's history. In the Old Tongue, his name means musician, which is a pretty interesting choice for a character who's aligned with the Dark One. but in the real world, his name has a more sinister origin. It comes from Asmodeus in Latin, or Ashmedai in Hebrew, who is known as a prince of demons in hell. Although his name comes from wrath and demon, Asmodeus is primarily known for representing lust, especially in later texts. Asmodeus is best known for his appearance in the Book of Tobit, which is accepted as canon in some Christian faiths but is non-canonical in others. In this tale, the demon is the main antagonist who falls in love with a human woman named Sarah and kills her lovers one after another. He's eventually defeated by a man named Tobias, who's guided by the angel Raphael. Tobias burns a fish's heart and liver on a hot stone, which drives the demon away. The angel Raphael then binds Asmodeus, and in some translations even strangles the demon. Tobias marries Sarah and they have a happily ever after. In the Talmud, Asmodeus is depicted slightly differently as Ashmedai. He's less malicious and often appears as a good-natured and humorous figure, though still lustful. In some tales, he tricks King Solomon and takes his place for several years until Solomon comes back and banishes him. In other stories, Ashmedai is tricked by King Solomon into helping with the construction of the first temple of Jerusalem. Jordan took some elements from these stories and applied them to the Forsaken Asmodean, namely the fact that he is defeated, bound, and tricked into helping the protagonist. In the present day of the books, he is first disguised as a gleeman, fooling Rand until he is revealed as he is betraying him. In their battle, Rand severs his power and Asmodean is captured, then forced to teach the Dragon Reborn how to channel. In the Second Age, Asmodean's original name was Joar Adam Nasosin, a noted composer and child prodigy whose music was played in cities across the world, but that was never quite enough fame for him. It's also said that during the War for Power, Asmodean would blind and/or maim other artists out of jealousy to prevent them from making more art, particularly his rivals. This may be a nod to the Book of Tobit, as Tobias' father Tobit is blinded in the story, possibly by Asmodeus. So let's talk about Asmodean's names, specifically his surname, Nasosin. It's a nod to Nessus, or Nessos, from Greek mythology. You might recognize him as the creepy centaur from Disney's Hercules. Anyways, in the myth, Nessus attempts to assault Heracles' wife, Deianira, and is ultimately killed by Heracles himself. It's interesting that both of Asmodean's names seem to allude to his predatory and lustful behavior towards women, but the thing is, I'm not so sure this is accurate to his character in the books. Sure, he was a handsome man and a skilled musician, so maybe he had a way with the ladies, and of course he's a villain as one of the Dark One's top generals, but I don't recall any instances of him being particularly creepy or predatory towards women. Now, we know that Jordan isn't afraid to tackle these kinds of topics with other characters. Other Forsaken and even people on the side of the light do this kind of stuff, so it's not like he would have shied away from portraying Asmodean as a creep if that's what he intended. Based on his talent with music from an early age, my title for Asmodean is gonna be The Composer. Next up, we're gonna talk about one of the most cryptic Forsaken, Moghedien. Those she betrayed gave her the moniker, which means deadly spider in the Old Tongue. This name is fitting as she is a master of hiding in the shadows, trapping her victims in webs of lies and deceit. Moghedien was one of the Forsaken who joined the Shadow before the War for Power, hiding her allegiance to worm her way into Lews Therin's ranks. She's particularly skilled in spying and using compulsion, and she is a master of the world of dreams. Interestingly, her name's likely true origin is Mogadon, the brand name of a drug called nitrazepam, which is used to treat insomnia and can cause forgetfulness and confusion. It's a fitting name for Moghedien, who's an expert at deception and manipulation. Moghedien's original name was Lilin Moiral, and in the Age of Legends, she wasn't significant enough to earn a third name. Her first name Lilin is similar to the name Lillian, and it's thought to be a reference to Lilith, who is believed to be the first wife of Adam in Jewish mythology. Lilith is also known as a demoness. Moiral, on the other hand, is probably referring to the Moirai, the Greek goddesses of fate who weave the threads of destiny, much like a spider weaves a web. At one point she uses the alias Merrigan, which is another hint towards her role. The name is likely a reference to the Morrigan, an Irish Celtic warrior goddess who incites war and stirs up the frenzy of battle. Though not much of a warrior herself, Moghedien certainly incites war and uses deception and disguise to continue the frenzy, most notably when she pretends to be Demon Dread and lead his armies. Mogedion is a spy and conveniently already comes with her own easily recognizable nickname, the Spider. Next we have Agenor, who is said to be the second most powerful male Forsaken. He was an accomplished biological scientist in the Age of Legends, developing new crops and farming techniques. However, his true passion was experimenting on animals. When the Shadow emerged, he was quick to join their cause, perhaps in pursuit of even greater and more twisted experiments. It was Agenor who created many of the Shadow spawn we see in the series, including the Trollocs, Drugkar, Golem, and the rare Jumara, which only appears in a cut chapter called River of Souls. So while he may have been a brilliant scientist, his contributions to the Shadow are nothing short of monstrous. In the Old Tongue, the name Agenor translates to Slicer of the Living, as noted in the Wheel of Time Companion. The name was inspired by Agenor, a character from the Iliad who was defeated in a battle with Hector. Despite knowing that Hector was more powerful, Agenor believed he had the gods on his side and could emerge victorious. This closely mirrors the encounter between Agenor and Rand at the end of the Eye of the World. Although Agenor was aware that Rand was the Dragon Reborn, he was confident that his experience and allegiance to the Dark One would be enough to overcome him. Although Agenor came close to defeating Rand, he ultimately met his demise due to his overconfidence in channeling too much of the One power. While there are other characters in Greek mythology named Agenor, none of them share any parallels with the Forsaken. Agenor's name during the Second Age was Ishar Murad Chuain. Isha is a Hindi name that means one who protects, and the Ishar is also the name of a milkweed tree found in Arabia. Spoilers for a different series here, but in an interesting parallel in the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, Ishar is the name of a previously good but now insane immortal herald. He does horrific experiments on living beings in much the same way that Agenor experimented to create the Shadow Spawn. Both of these characters were inspired by Shiro Ishii, the Surgeon General of Unit 731, a Japanese biological warfare unit during World War II. Under his direction, hundreds of thousands died in experiments of the worst kind of cruelty, which were conducted in the name of medical research. Morad can either be a surname or a reference to the infamous Uzbek warlord and slave trader Morad Beg, Khan of Kunduz, who overran towns in Afghanistan in 1821. The name Murad is also used in town names in the region. It's possible that Chuain refers to the renowned biochemist Sir Ernest Boris Chain, who helped discover penicillin, considering Agenor's background in biological science. After Agenor's death, the Dark One brings him back to life as Osangar. The name Osan comes from a US airbase located near the demilitarized zone in Korea, and as you might imagine, this base is focused on maintaining combat readiness. Osangar's purpose was to be stationed near Rand, in what the Shadow considered to be the combat zone, to gather information and launch swift attacks when necessary. He also uses an alias called Corlin de Shiva. One theory is that the name is a combination of two words, Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction, and Dashera, a festival which celebrates the triumph of the good Prince Rama over evil. This could be an ironic allusion to Deshiva appearing to be one of the good guys, as he assisted Flynn in developing his method of healing, but in reality, he was undermining Rand's cause as one of the Forsaken in disguise. My nickname for Agenor will be the Scientist. Now let's move on to Balthamel, one of the Forsaken who was released from the Boar along with Agenor. Balthamel had a reputation for being hot-tempered in the Age of Legends, and had to be physically restrained during political meetings. He was also known for consorting with the lower elements of society, including criminals. Despite this, he managed to maintain his rank due to his immense strength and the power. Balthamel was a scholar of lost civilizations and turned to the Shadow for one simple reason: immortality and the ability to retain his youth. However, his body had been trapped so close to the surface that time ravaged him, leaving him as nothing more than a husk once he was released. He is believed to have headed an intelligence network which competed with the one run by Mogedion. He also set up camps to breed humans as food for Trollocs. Balthamel means pain of youth in the old tongue of the Wheel of Time. The name may be related to one of two versions of Balthazar, one being the name of one of the Magi who brought gifts to a young Jesus, or the other Balthazar that was co-regent of Babylon when the Jews were exiled there. Though there is no direct character relation, only a name similarity. During the Second Age, he was known as Ival Rahman, not having earned a third name. Eval probably refers to Mount Ebal/Ebal, the barren gray mountain where the tribes of Israel heard the curse of God, the consequences if they disobey the 10 Commandments. Certainly, Eval Ramon broke most of the commandments before the Dark One even touched the world. Eval is also similar to evil. In addition to his first name, Ramon is also significant. It's similar to Rimmon in the Old Testament, another name for Hadad in the Assyro-Babylonian pantheon. Ramon was the god of storms, thunder, and rain, and was considered the chief god of the Arameans. The Arameans were known to have contended with the Israelites for territory in biblical times. Eval Ramon was said to have studied ancient or vanished cultures, much like historians today study the Arameans. Like Agenor, Balthamel's soul was snatched at the moment of death and placed in a new body, now called Arengar. However, this body was a woman's, which they used to infiltrate and influence the Aes Sedai rebellion and prolong the conflict under the name Halima. If the name Arengar followed the same conventions as Osengar, it would be referencing the Aran Islands off the coast of Ireland, but there's no connection here. However, the name Halima may be in reference to the African name meaning gentle, which would be ironic as they have killed several people and broke a man's arm. There's a theory that Balthamel may be partially inspired by Dionysus, Greek god of wine. He's also known for chaos and emotion, which suits Balthamel's temper and love for the seedier elements of society. Dionysus was also born twice, similar to how they are reborn as Arengar/Halima. Additionally, the female followers of Dionysus, called Maenad, were inspired to commit acts of violence and mutilation, and orgies, which mirrors Halima's leading of the Black Aja in the Rebel Aes Sedai camp. Kinda. I mean, we don't know. On the other hand, the Greek god's male followers were satyr, half men and half goat. These were a major inspiration for the Trollocs, among other half-animal hybrids, and if you remember, Balthamel bred humans to be turned into Trollocs by Agenor. Speaking of this, his function as a head of intelligence and the atrocities that he committed in setting up camps of people to feed Trollocs are derived from Nazi figures such as Fritz Sauckel, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, and Heinrich Müller. I'm going to give Balthamel the title of the historian based on his study of ancient civilizations. Now on to Mesaana, whose name means teacher of lessons in the Old Tongue, a fitting title for someone who was once a teacher in the Age of Legends. However, Mesaana had bigger aspirations. She yearned to be a researcher, to make new discoveries and push the boundaries of knowledge, but her dreams were crushed when she was rejected from that path. Despite her disappointment, she continued to teach about the discoveries made by others. But when the Shadow began to gain power, Mesaana made a fateful decision. She joined their ranks, seeing an opportunity to become the true researcher she had always wanted to be. Freed from the constraints of the Aes Sedai, she became an efficient and organized agent of the Shadow. Her tactics were particularly insidious. She set up schools to corrupt the youth, indoctrinating them to report on their friends and families and hunt down teachers and researchers from the old schools. She even went so far as to instruct her pupils to tear down institutions like libraries and museums. Mesaana's tactics resulted in an entire generation of children who were brainwashed into becoming roving bands of brigands, terrorizing the nations under the name of Mesaana's children. They were racing to tear the world apart before the male channelers could break it first. The sheer scale of the indoctrination and manipulation employed by Mesaana is eerily reminiscent of totalitarian regimes like those depicted in George Orwell's 1984 and real-world warlords who employ armies of children. Mesaana's name comes from Messalina, the third wife of Roman Emperor Claudius and cousin to both Nero and Caligula. Messalina was infamous for her ruthless conspiracies against other members of the Roman ruling class and her scandalous reputation for promiscuity. The choice of names seems fitting, giving Mesaana's own willingness to use any means necessary to achieve her goals. Her second age name of Sain Terrasind doesn't seem to hold any real-world significance or relevant meaning, other than the fact that it's noted that both Sain and Terrasind are based on real names from our world. One possibly relevant tidbit is that the home of the monarchy of Ebudar is called the Terrasind Palace. There may be some relation there, but no further connection is known. Mesaana is theorized to be partially based on Athena, the ancient Greek goddess of war, reason, wisdom, intellectual activity, and schools. Minerva was her ancient Roman equivalent. She represented the intellectual defensive side of war. Her most commonly described feature is being bright-eyed or silvery-eyed. From Crown of Swords, silver eyes frown from a face of smoke, with silver lips drawn in a tight line. As with many other Forsaken, part of their character inspiration is based on real-world war criminals, with Mesaana most closely resembling Nazi Party member Alfred Rosenberg. He was snubbed for the position of foreign minister and was instead given the role of supervising political ideology and education. Rosenberg organized and directed a special unit which removed books, art treasures, and collections from museums, libraries, and private houses in all the German-occupied territories. The Shadow also wanted the Old Order obliterated, and Mesaana encouraged mobs of children to destroy museums and libraries containing anything that might detract from the Dark One's glory. In summary, Mesaana is a complex and fascinating character whose backstory is a cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing knowledge at any cost. Her actions reveal the insidious ways in which power can corrupt and warp even the most noble of intentions. I'm giving her the moniker of the Professor. Moving on, let's talk about Balal. In the Old Tongue, his name means desire to have, the envious, and I believe his name evolved from Bealdred in Jordan's early list of the Forsaken. As I mentioned earlier, the inspiration for his name comes from Belial, a Hebrew word. In the Hebrew Bible, the word simply meant worthless one, and usually was used to refer to someone lazy or unproductive. In the New Testament, the word was used by Paul in 2 Corinthians where he asks, "What concord hath Christ with Belial?" Paul therefore regards Belial as either chief of demons or as Satan. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, an ancient Jewish text from around the 1st to 3rd century BC, he appears in a story called The War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness, which is very appropriate. In this tale, he is known as the leader of the Sons of Darkness and a fallen angel. He is clearly depicting the same figure as Satan or Lucifer or any other name for the adversary of God character and leader of the armies of hell. In the Wheel of Time, Balal was a master manipulator, and though he was the weakest of the male Forsaken in the One Power, he made up for it with wit and his skills as a blade master. He was known as an advocate, representing people in the court of law. Before joining the Shadow, he was known as Durham Ladel Cham, a friend of Luce Theron Telamon who helped him revive the ancient art of sword fighting for sport. Initially he fought alongside the dragon against the Shadow, but jealousy led him to betray the light. His first name Durham may be a reference to the first Earl of Durham, George Lambton, a famous and radical legislator. This is fitting due to Balal's former position as an advocate dealing with laws. During the War for Power, he and Demondred led attacks on the area containing the Choden Call, but never managed to find the access key. His mastery of manipulation earned him the nickname Netweaver. After being released from the Boar, Balal managed to use his manipulation tactics to become the High Lord of Tyr, posing as Lord Samon, where he planned to lure Rand and use him to steal Kalandor. Based on his job as an advocate in the Age of Legends, I reject his title of Netweaver and deem Balal the Lawyer. Semirog is next, and in the Old Tongue her name means the Promise of Pain. Her name resembles Semiramis, who was a legendary Assyrian queen that had her husband King Ninus of Babylon executed so she could take the throne. She's said to have had many lovers, and each lover was killed after the Night of Passion to ensure her power and throne were never threatened. Similarly, Semirog brutally killed or used people as she saw fit to enhance her plans for power. Her name also bears a resemblance to Shemihaza, which was the name of the leader of the fallen angels in the Book of Enoch. As you may have noticed, many Forsaken were named for fallen angels to mirror their fall from grace, turning to the Shadow. She was known in the Age of Legends as the most prominent healer of the body, as Graendal was the best healer of the mind. She was known as a Restorer, presumably a group of elite Aes Sedai doctors. Though she was the greatest restorer alive, able to bring people back from the brink of death, she secretly enjoyed causing pain along with her healing. She would bring her patients extra suffering on purpose before saving them, only for them to disregard it, just thankful to be alive. However, for those she deemed inferior, she would instead torture and kill them. This behavior began long before the Boar was opened and the Shadow released. It was simply in her nature to enjoy inflicting pain. She was revealed before the Aes Sedai and threatened with stilling. Instead, she became one of the first to join the Shadow. In the war for power, she was notorious for torturing and her mastery of the limits of both human pleasure and pain. She forced entire cities to torture one another to death, and took the most prominent prisoners for her own experiments. It was Semirog who discovered that a circle of 13 channelers and 13 half-men could turn any channeler to the shadow, regardless of power level. Her second age name was Nemin Demendar Boan, and the first name may refer to the Nemean lion of Greek legend killed by Heracles. The only weapon that could pierce the lion's hide was its own claw, much like how Rand uses the true power from the Dark One for the first time to balefire Semirog and kill her, since he could not use his own power. Her surname, Boan, refers to one of the names of the Divine Mother in Irish folklore, representing the giver of life and fruitfulness, alluding to Semirog's abilities in healing. Because of this, I'll give her the additional title of the Doctor. Interestingly, the white-hot iron and bloody hand viewing that Min has in the first book, which was meant for a plot point that was dropped before it was published, was reworked into the event where Semirog destroys Rand's hand. He was holding the dragon scepter when the fireball hit, and it briefly became white-hot iron, so the viewing is still accurate. Our next Forsaken is Samael, Destroyer of Hope in the Old Tongue. In the Ascension of Isaiah, Samael is a demon that will lead the king of Judah to Belial. In rabbinic literature, Samael is the chief of the Satans, note plural, adversaries, and his name means the venom of God, since he is the angel of death. According to Gustav Davidson in a Dictionary of Angels, Samael has been regarded as both evil and good, as one of the greatest and one of the foulest spirits operating in heaven, on earth, and in hell. This is appropriate since Samael was originally an important general on the side of the light, and changed sides late in the war when he became convinced that the light would lose against the shadow. His second age name was Tel Janin Aelinsar, which doesn't appear to have any major historical or linguistic connections. It's possibly a reference to the city of Jenin in Samaria, Palestine. It's a very ancient settlement mentioned in the Amarna letters, 14th century BC, found at Tel Amarna, Egypt. Jenin was taken by Crusaders in the Middle Ages and was a Turkish-German base in World War I. In the Age of Legends, he was a world champion sportsman, excelling in many sports including the recently revived art of sword fighting. Once the War for Power broke out, he found success as a general of the light, specializing in defense. He eventually became convinced that the light could never win, but really his jealousy of Luz Theron is also what drove him to the dark, as was too common with the Forsaken. Samael regarded himself as the superior general and was upset that the command of the forces of the light was given to the dragon instead of him. It was Luz Theron that gave him the massive scar across his face, which could be easily healed through the one power, yet he keeps it as a reminder of his defeat. Samael massively preferred leading militaries to governance, so areas that were under his control were neglected and drained of all resources to supply his army. In contrast, his armies were treated relatively well, due to the fact that he believed in keeping his tools of war sharp and ready, much like his equipment in his sportsman days. It's probably pretty obvious, but I'm gonna call Samael the sportsman. Grendel is our next focus, her name meaning vessel of pleasure in the Old Tongue. The moniker Grendel originates from the Anglo-Saxon legend of Beowulf, in which a monstrous man-eater named Grendel terrorizes Denmark for 12 years by abducting and devouring warriors. Grendel is eventually defeated by Beowulf, who also defeats Grendel's vengeful mother. Although the monster Grendel is male and the Forsaken Grendel is female, she could be described as a man-eater. The name Grendel reflects Robert Jordan's belief that myths evolve over time. The characters of the mother and son monsters in the original story merge into a single female monster who kills children to spare them the suffering of watching their parents become her slaves. The character of Beo the Wild, an alias used by Dumondred, is modeled after the dragon-slaying Beowulf. During the Age of Legends, she was the greatest healer of the mind in the world, known as Camariel Meridim Nindar. Two of these names are references to specific locations in India, as many of the Aes Sedai names are. However, the name Camariel may be inspired by Carmilla, the female vampire in the 1872 book of the same name by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. Another female vampire of this name also features in Netflix's adaptation of Castlevania. Before the War for Power, Camariel's personality was the complete opposite of what we encounter in the series. She was a hardcore ascetic, shunning fancy clothes or decadent lifestyles, encouraging others to do the same. Though world famous, loved and respected as the best mender of the mind, she learned how to manipulate people to do what she wanted. This morphed into using compulsion to treat mental illness, all the while she had complete control. Once she joined the Shadow, her lifestyle did a complete 180, taking hedonism to its limits. Now Graendal, she wore lavish jewels and sheer dresses that left little to the imagination, surrounding herself with half-naked slaves and hosting magically enhanced orgies. Territories were not won by battle, but through the people's minds, inciting riots and extreme hedonistic behavior, and quite a few of her enemies mysteriously took their own life. Graendal is killed and reborn as an old, ugly crone named Hessalam, which means without forgiveness in the Old Tongue. Her name alludes significantly to John Haslam, an English doctor and apothecary renowned for his contributions to the study of mental illness. Haslam initially researched physical brain disorders before becoming known as one of the earliest examples of mad doctors. The majority of his work was done at London's Bethlehem Hospital, which was commonly referred to as Bethlehem or Bedlam. Because we already have one doctor, I'm going to give Graendal the title of the Healer. Ravin is the next target on our list. In the Old Tongue, his name means promise of freedom. Nothing is known about him before the War for Shadow other than his name Ered Mosinel. His names are likely references to Ered, Israel, and Mosina, Poland, respectively. Ravin appeared seemingly out of nowhere in high council among followers of Shaitan. Where Samael despised politics and administration, Ravin thrived in it. He ran his territories with a cruel efficiency and an iron fist. A frequent user of compulsion, he was very promiscuous and his partners were most often not doing it by choice. He was susceptible to sycophancy and reactive to rejection, promoting those who flatter and appease him but quick to retaliate violently when their intentions are proven false. It's odd that his tendencies fall much more in line with the connotations behind Asmodean's names. Ravin's name is probably derived from Ravana, the second of three incarnations of an Indian demon who was the enemy of Vishnu. In addition to his wives, Ravana had a huge harem. He was very learned but also very aggressive and is noted for capturing Sita, Rama's wife, and being killed by Rama for it. Morghese, who Ravin seduced, learned that she shared him with 7 other women. Rand attacked and killed Ravin because he believed that Ravin had killed Morghese. Additionally, in Hindu tradition, Ravana is a Rakshasa, a species of powerful, usually evil magic users. They are usually portrayed as having dark skin, while Ravana is supposed to be very noble and attractive. These traits describe Ravin as well. Also, Ravana banished his brother who counsels him on righteousness, while Ravin banishes all of Morghese's wise and righteous advisors. Ravin also goes by the alias Gabriel, taken from the archangel Gabriel. He is using an angelic name to disguise his true intentions to Queen Morghese and the people of Andor. This isn't the only time that Jordan used the name of a, quote, good angel in a negative sense, implying his belief that great power corrupts absolutely. I've decided to call Ravin the Politician. Finally, we're down to the last 3 Forsaken and the most dangerous. We'll continue with Demandred, aka the one who twists the blade in the Old Tongue. The character's name is a combination of demon and dread, while being spelled like demand, which alludes to his persistent demands to engage in a one-on-one battle with the dragon. Additionally, his name can be interpreted as Demon Modred, which is the corrupted version of King Arthur's nephew, Modred. In the Battle of Camelin, Modred fought against King Arthur, who shares a parallel with Rand, and both inflicted mortal wounds upon each other. Demandred sought to claim the role of the savior, just as Modred attempted to claim King Arthur's throne and wife. However, instead of facing Rand as he desired, Demandred ended up battling 3 knights with Arthurian names, one of whom was Galad Damodred, the virtuous version of Modred. His name in the Second Age was Bered Bel Madar. The name Barid probably refers to the Barid Shahi dynasty of the former nation of Badir, located in what is now southwestern India. Bel is one of the names of the god Marduk, the chief god of the city of Babylon. Originally a god of thunderstorms, he ascended to the throne after defeating Tiamat, a primordial being of creation depicted as a dragon. This echoes Dimandred's hope of defeating the dragon and succeeding him. While in Shara, Dimandred enters a cavern where he fights and kills the dragon-like Jumara to win the Sa'angreal Sakarnin, which may be alluding to Sakan, the original antagonist. This scene may have been inspired by the Lambton worm, named for the same John George Lambton, future Earl of Durham that we discussed earlier. In this tale, John Lambton must slay this demonic worm at the River Weir with the help of a witch's instructions. After slaying the Jumara, Dimandred was named Beo the Wild and given the title of Dragon Slayer. This is a reference to Beowulf, who slays a dragon, as well as shouting out a volunteer at JordanCon, Bao Pham. Another reference may be pointing to Bai Chi, a general of the Qin kingdom, which at the time was known as the Wild Beast. Bai, given the title Ren Tu, or Human Butcher, was responsible for over 900,000 deaths and conquered many cities. Much like how Dimandred had fed the populations of 2 cities to Trollocs because they offended him during the War for Power. Dimandred's entire life was defined by being second best to Luz Therin in everything. They grew up together, always pursuing the same goals, with Luz always slightly winning out over Barid. Similar to Samael, Dimandred turned to the shadow out of jealousy to the dragon, and a belief that he would be a better general. If anything, there was a real competition among the Forsaken about which of them was the true rival to the dragon. After winning many battles for the light, his jealousy and belief that the light would lose under Luz Therin drove him to the dark. Because his early life was entirely defined by his competition with the dragon, I will call him the rival. The last of the female Forsaken, next up we have Lanfear. She gave herself the name meaning Daughter of the Night in the Old Tongue. In real-world parallels, her name could be adapted from L'Enfer, which means hell in French, with fear tacked on for good measure. It could also be a reference to Lasser, goddess of spring budding and eldest of a triad of Irish goddesses. Most notably, Lasser is described with a similar appearance to Lanfear, long black hair and silver jewelry, but also a silver crown. Lanfear first meets Rand while in disguise as a teenage girl named Selene, a name taken from the goddess of the crescent moon in ancient Greece. The goddess Selene was associated with a beautiful youth named Endymion, who is locked in an eternal sleep on Mount Latmus. Some forms of the myth say Selene herself put him under the spell so that she could have him all to herself. This parallels her story in the series, as Lanfear herself was bound deepest in the ceiling of the Boar, cast in a dreamless sleep for millennia. Her entire motivation is out of a desire for Luz Therin and later Rand, so it's fair to say she wants to keep him all to herself. After dying by the hands of Moraine, she too was reincarnated by the Dark One, this time as Sindain. This is suggested to be a combination of 2 names, Cynthia and Dane. Cynthia is one of the names of Artemis in ancient Greece, the goddess of the moon and the hunt, based on her birthplace of Mount Cynthus on Delos. The word Dane could allude to the blonde hair and blue eyes of her new incarnation, as well as the Vikings who had caused so much destruction in England, who were referred to as Danes. In the books, Lanfear was known as Muireann Aeronile, a researcher at the Colum Dawn, the top Aes Sedai university. Above the university floated a research center called the Sharome, a massive sphere. Missana, who wanted to be a researcher but could only be a teacher, probably hated her if they knew each other then. Muireann was part of the team who discovered the existence of the true source, inadvertently releasing Shaitan. She was one of the few survivors of the destruction of the Sharome and Colum Dawn. She had been briefly involved with Luz Therin years before this, though they split up because he realized she was more attracted to his status and to use him to gain her own power. She never moved on, disrupting his wedding to Ilyena Sunhair, and eventually joined the Shadow out of jealousy for Ilyena and hatred from Luz's rejection. Due to her early role as a researcher at Colum Dawn, I'm going to call her the Scholar. Finally, we've come to Ishamael, who, like his fellow Forsaken, has numerous names and aliases, maybe having the most. The name Ishmael in the Old Tongue means betrayer of hope. It's inspired by the biblical character Ishmael, who is the son of Abraham and an outcast. In turn, the term Ishmaelite refers to someone who is shunned by society. During the Age of Legends, Ishmael boldly declared his allegiance to the Dark One and was subsequently humbled by Lews Therin in the Hall of the Servants. Another allusion is to the Ismaili fighters of the 11th to 13th centuries, more commonly known as assassins or hashashim. His original name was Elan Morin Tedranai. Elan is a term in philosophy, the elan vital, life force, which causes disorder, appropriate since Elan Morin was a philosopher who caused a lot of disorder. Elan is also a Hebrew personal name meaning tree, and the name of a town in Ethiopia and in France. Ilana is a Greek personal name meaning light, much like the light that Elan Morin forsook. The name Morin may refer to Jean Morin, the French theologian and biblical scholar who produced major studies on the history and discipline of the early Christian church. Elan Morin was a great philosopher during the Age of Legends, perhaps the most famous and influential. Once the Boar was opened, he was the first to publicly announce his defection to the Shadow, in a meeting of the greatest minds of the world assembled to figure out how to fight it. This caused a great uproar and riots worldwide as one of the most respected figures ever dropped this bombshell. While the seal was put in place, he was only partially trapped, taking 40 years to become fully imprisoned only to be spat back out in 40-year cycles until present day. He later goes by the moniker Baal-Zaman, which traces back to a leader during the Trolloc Wars, later adopted by various dreadlords, and finally taken up by Ishmael. It's possible that Ishmael himself was that ancient leader. The real-world inspiration for the name is from Baal-Shaman, an ancient Middle Eastern deity. A related form of this name is Beelzebub, and he is referred to as the head demon. Similarly, many characters in the series had the mistaken idea that Baal-Zaman referred to the Dark One, possibly including Ishmael himself in his madness, thinking he was Shaitan personified. Just like some of the other Forsaken that don't fall to balefire, Ishmael is brought back from death after he is killed by Rand, with the new name Moradin. In the Old Tongue, Moradin means grave, tomb, or death. It may come from the root mort, or sometimes mord, meaning death. Moradin may have also been derived from Merthin, the Welsh name for Merlin, the Arthurian wizard. He went mad after a battle and lived wild in the woods, and his gift of prophecy was acquired at this time. He foretold that he would die a triple death of simultaneous falling, stabbing, and drowning. Ishmael/Moradin's sanity has been doubted, and his death was complicated. After his first death by stabbing, he was transmigrated into a new body and then was burned out. His soul died, but his body lived on, animated by Rand's soul. Towards the end of the series, he is appointed as Nablus, which is a title for the most valuable follower of Shaitan. The name is derived from Iblis, the personal name of the devil in Islam. Ishmael will be called the Philosopher. So there we have it, all 13 of our Forsaken. Asmodean the Bard, Moghedien the Spider, Agenor the Scientist, Balthamel the Historian, Masana the Professor, Balal the Lawyer, Semirog the Doctor, Samael the Sportsman, Graendal the Healer, Ravin the Politician, Demondread the Rival, Lanfear the Scholar, and Ishmael the Philosopher. But we're not done yet. We still have a bonus Forsaken. There was one channeler born in present day who managed to climb the ranks of Dark Friends to become a Dreadlord and eventually be named as the only new Forsaken since the sealing. The once false dragon known as Mazrim Taim became a Dark Friend and proved instrumental in corrupting many of the male channelers of the Black Tower. Mihail means Supreme Leader in the Old Tongue. This is a breaking of the name of the Archangel Michael, a great captain and the leader of heavenly hosts. Mihail's arc and title are clear references to the supreme leader of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, and how he corrupted legions with his power, influence, and ideologies. The Hail in his name is reminiscent of the phrase Hail Hitler, and there are obviously many parallels with every member of the Forsaken and the Nazis, meant to demonstrate the most heinous atrocities people can commit. The name Mazrim Taim has real-world roots as well, and as expected. Taim was an important clan of Arabs at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Mazrim came from Cardinal Mazarin, who was a 17th century manipulative politician that transferred his services from the Pope to the French court. Similarly, there was uncertainty about which side Taim was working for, and he was able to corrupt many Asha'man before being driven out of the Black Tower. And I'm sorry, but there's one more villain we need to talk about, an enemy of both the light and the shadow, our secret bonus villain, Padan Fain. This character has many forms and aliases, and he is unique because the source of his evil does not come from the Dark One. While he starts as a simple peddler and a dark friend, he is soon merged with the evil spirit Mashadar, which was born from the evil of an ancient city that used the Shadow's own tactics to fight for the light. Eventually, Fain revokes his dark friend vows, retaining his mission of hunting the Dragon Reborn, but for his own purposes now. With the power of Mashadar, he spreads a vile mist that is capable of killing Myrddraal and turning both men and Trollocs into zombie-like servants. The name Padan may come from a noted family of merchants of the same name on the Oregon Trail, while the name Fain may come from the name of Napoleon's private secretary, someone who would be privy to powerful secrets. At one point, he goes by the name Ordith, which has connotations of or death and brings to mind the phrase victory or death. Eventually, he names himself Geral Mordeth, with Mordeth being the name of the man who originally became the vessel of Mashadar and caused the downfall of Ariel. The name resembles Mordred, another spelling of Modred, Arthur's enemy, using the Modred/Arthur parallel once again to allude to Fain's obsession with hunting and killing the Dragon Reborn. Finally, he gives himself the title Shaisam, which means Shadow Destroyer in the Old Tongue. At this point, he believes himself equal or stronger in power than both the Dragon Reborn and the Dark One. However, he is killed very unceremoniously by Matt before he can ever reach them. It's theorized that the pattern created Shaisam and put him in place, just in case Randalthor decided to destroy the Dark One entirely, instead of trapping him once again. Now that we're finally finished with the Forsaken, and there's no more hidden extras, let's discuss the various shadow spawn employed by Shaitan and his generals. Firstly, and most numerous, are the Trollocs. They were genetically engineered by Agenor as crossbreeds between humans and various ferocious or aggressive animals. Though collectively they only share their human half, they're all called Trollocs. The origin of this name is simply a cross between the words troll and orc, which is probably pretty obvious, and they're stand-ins for the typical soldiers of the dark in fantasy. There are 12 clans, and I promise this will be quick. Afrait, strong wind in the Old Tongue. From Ifrit, a djinn of Islamic mythology, or from Final Fantasy. Algol, the soulless in Old Tongue. From ghouls, corpse-eating demons. Banshin, bringers of annihilation in Old Tongue. From Banshee, a wailing spirit. Daval, sires of agony in the Old Tongue. From Devil, not the Prince of Evil but minor demons. Daimon, scythes of war in the Old Tongue. From Demon. Jinnin, those who cause terror in the Old Tongue. From Jinn, spirits in Arabic myth. Gargael, brutes of venom in the Old Tongue. From Gargoyle. Goblin, harvesters of souls in the Old Tongue. From Goblin, wandering malicious sprites. Golem, takers of souls in the Old Tongue. From the word golem, an artificially created being. Gremlin, prized of the mighty in the Old Tongue. From Gremlin, troublemaking imps. Gnomon, scythes of devastation in the Old Tongue. From Gnome, subterranean spirits or goblins. And Kobal, brotherhood in the Old Tongue. From Kobold, another type of mischievous imp. It's suggested that real-world mythological creatures are folk memories of the Trollocs, as each clan has traits of each of these legends. I just think it's funny to see the origin of gnomes meaning scythes of devastation. It makes me imagine a super edgy gnome warlock in World of Warcraft. Next we have half-men, otherwise known as Fades or Myrddraal. Certain features of half-men are very reminiscent of the Nazgul in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, right down to the black horses they ride, terrifying appearance, and the fear of crossing bodies of water. This is probably because at the point it was written, you couldn't get your first fantasy novel published unless it resembled Lord of the Rings in some way. The Myrddraal are also very serpentine in appearance and movement, with many examples of snake-like people, especially in Greek mythology, including Echidna, Kekrops, the Lamia, the Gorgons, as well as the Islamic jinn, sometimes being said to turn into snakes. In addition, snakes are closely associated with Satan, the basis for Shaitan. Even when dismembered or decapitated, a Myrddraal doesn't truly die until the sun goes down. This mirrors the fact that snakes and other ectotherms, aka cold-blooded animals, are able to survive for minutes to hours when decapitated due to needing much less oxygen to fuel their body and brain. Myrddraal could be a combination of Myrddin, the Welsh name for the Arthurian magician Merlin, and Baal, the ancient Middle Eastern god/demon in the Bible. The name also has connotations of murder or murder all. Our next contender is the Draghkar. Their inspiration comes from a mix between vampires through Bram Stoker's Dracula, as well as Norse Draugr, undead warriors who kill by drinking blood or eating flesh. Their song that lures in victims may be a reference to a siren, while their soul-sucking power can be seen in various mythological creatures around the world, particularly being associated with demons. Now we're going to talk about Darkhounds, which are said to give rise to rumors of Old Grim and his wild hunt. They are spectral hounds inspired by the wild hunt of European folk myth, a ghostly procession of a leader and his hunters through the night sky, accompanied by howling winds. The hunt was said to pass through the forest in the coldest, stormiest time of the year. Anyone found outdoors at this time would be swept up into the hunting party involuntarily and dropped miles from their original location. Practitioners of magic may have sought to join the berserkers in spirit, while their bodies remained safely at home. The Darkhounds in the series are speculated by the Forsaken to have been partially shifted into another world during their creation, which explains why they leave no footprints like a ghost. Next we have the Golem, men and women who not only pledge their souls to Shaitan, but give them away entirely, becoming extremely effective assassins who are almost unnoticeable even in an empty room. They're an interesting contrast to their namesake, as the Golem of Jewish myth is an artificial man, but in the Wheel of Time, the Golem are specifically the only shadow spawn that are not a construct, but rather a regular human without a soul. They are also known as Grey Men, which refers to the concept of a revenant. Revenants are walking corpses, grey and rotting, who search for people to harm or kill. They don't randomly wander like in the modern-day portrayals of zombies. In early stories, they returned to harass their surviving families and neighbors, but later it was believed that they returned for a specific purpose. They were evil when alive, just as Grey Men and women were. Then we have Ma Shin Chen, the black wind that haunts the ways. A powerful force of indiscriminate destruction, it gets its name from Machine of Sin. Finally, we have the various animals inhabiting the world that belong to the Shadow. Ravens and other creatures report to Dark Friends, which is very similar to how Saruman uses crows as his spies in The Lord of the Rings. We also have Dark Friends, which are normal humans that align themselves with Shaitan in order to gain power. This is also seen in Tolkien's work with the forces of humans that join Sauron. Alright, and that's it. This turned out way longer than I initially anticipated, but seeing how much thought and real-world influences were packed into these names and characters, it was an effort just to pack it all into this one video. If you'd like to read more about this, I got most of my information from The World of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time and The Origins of the Wheel of Time. A good amount also came from Linda over at the 13th Depository, her blog where she goes into exhaustive detail about the inspirations for the Shadow, among many other Wheel of Time related articles. Overall, the origins behind the characters of the Shadow and the Wheel of Time provide fascinating insights into the development of the series as a whole, and understanding the etymology and history behind these characters helps to enrich our appreciation of the story and its many layers of meaning. I love this book series and others like it precisely for this reason, because not only does learning the background help with the understanding of the story itself, it also goes the other way and gets readers like me interested to learn what those characters were inspired by, and leads to learning about history and our own world. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the origins of the Shadow and the Wheel of Time. I do plan on making a follow-up video to this about the Side of the Light, which will be just as long if not longer. If you've made it all the way to the end and you're a subscriber, you get a super special 3 gold stars for this long video. Thank you. Bye-bye.